What if I told you that the last scene in Dan Brown's latest novel, Secret of Secret, symbolizes or reveals a huge shift in consciousness, the end of materialism, as well as the end of a biblical or Christian conception of the self?
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Welcome to American Krishna. I'm Charles War, also known as Chandrasekhar. I was initiated in the Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition in 1995, and I hold two graduate degrees in religious studies. This channel is different from other channels, I would say, because precisely we make references to ancient scriptures such as the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavata Purana or the Srimad Bhagavatam. So if you're interested in what's called Indian, quote-unquote, philosophy, theology, if you believe in reincarnation, in karma, in consciousness, in life on other planets, and if you'd like to give strength to this channel, then please do subscribe. Thank you very much. So I just finished reading Dan Brown's Secret of Secrets, and the last scene is amazing. So you've got this Elizabeth Solomon, the heroine, this scientist whose research thesis paper from 20 years ago was stolen, she just found out, by the CIA, who's been trying to kill her during the whole book, in order to create an underground illegal lab under the city of Prague, using as guinea pigs two poor orphan young adults from Russia who have schizophrenic and epileptic conditions. And her whole belief and the premise of the whole book is that consciousness is not locational. Consciousness does not spring from neurons and protons in the brain, okay? That's the whole theme of the book.
I haven't had a religious experience. I haven't had an out-of-body experience. I haven't had a near-death experience.
Yeah.
This is based on the science that is happening right now.
It's very comforting
We
to
are
think
in,
that.
This is an astonishing time in the study of consciousness.
Sure.
We're going to find out in the next 5 years some things that should change our view of who we are, how we interact with each other, and really what happens beyond.
And so in the last scene, the very last scene of the book, when during the whole time we think that that one manuscript that was left has been destroyed by Robert Langdon, the actual hero of the book, who had to burn it in order to escape a bad guy in some library, he brings her to this museum where there's this huge ancient Bible on some sort of pedestal. And so he climbs up and he tells her, listen, Elizabeth, I'm going to read to you some verses from the Bible now. And she's like, oh, God, please don't bother me now with this stuff. It's an interesting point. And he's like, no, look, I'll read you a couple of verses. This will soothe your soul. And she's like, God. And so what happens is that he starts reading from her manuscript, which he hid up there in lieu of the Bible. And so she's starting to hear her own words. And she's like, she realizes, oh my God, the manuscript, you saved it. It's there. And he's like, yeah. So this is the point. There's two shifts here that I'd like to talk about. The first shift of paradigm is this shift that we're seeing more and more with philosophers, with neuroscientists, this idea of challenging, of going from a physicalist paradigm or a materialist paradigm to a consciousness as a fundamental building block of reality paradigm. In other words, what I just said, consciousness is not just a product of the brain. It's not that when the body is clinically dead and all the neurons and protons in the brain, all the cells are dead, then consciousness extinguishes itself. No, it continues to exist because consciousness exists outside and beyond the physical body. So that's the first paradigm shift we see in this book, which is really great because, as I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes or in a few seconds, this is exactly what I believe, and this is exactly what these ancient texts such as the Bhagavad Gita claim, the Vedic or the Krishna conscious paradigm. The second shift we see from this final scene is this shift basically from biblical anthropology to a more consciousness studies kind of paradigm. In other words, Elizabeth is like, enough with the Bible, And Robert acknowledges that. He even jokes with her, making her believe that he's going to read some quote-unquote boring verses from the Bible. This is not to say that the sentiments of devotion expressed in the Bible are bad or are unimpressive. On the contrary, there are wonderful gems in the Bible. However, when it comes to the actual understanding or conceptualization of consciousness, of the soul, people are not buying into it anymore. And so here, of course, I can't say this is a proof because we're talking about fiction, but symbolically speaking, you've got this leader of society, the scientist, Catherine Solomon, who is not an atheist, who certainly doesn't believe that consciousness is just a product of the brain. She's not a physicalist. She's not a materialist. On the contrary, she fights for this sort of idealist idea of consciousness. And her paradigm, namely the idea that we are pure consciousness and 0% our body. It's not that we have a soul. It's like we are souls and we have a human body. So she believes in that. Of course, there's no mention of her believing in God or devotion, all that. But her worldview literally is placed on top of the Bible. In other words, the latest neuroscientific studies pointing to a sort of a consciousness, a fundamental consciousness as the foundational building block of reality replaces or is placed on top of a biblical understanding of the soul, which is really a tripartite conception. In other words, we are a combination of body, mind, and soul. Briefly, a quick story. When my dad died, if I can tell you, my brother insisted that we have a Catholic funeral, so I asked the priest at the church in Paris the day before if I could come and speak about the Bhagavad Gita, and he said no. And then during the actual funeral, he spoke, and he said to everyone, I knew he was speaking to me, we have learned from the Greeks that the soul is eternal, the soul never dies. But as Christians, as Catholics, we do believe we are part body, part mind, part spirit. And that's where I want to get into this third point, that this novel of Dan Brown is a wonderful segue into what we could say is the winner paradigm, the winning paradigm, namely the Vedic paradigm. Now, whether you're a bhakti yogi, a Krishna conscious person like I am or trying to be, or whether you're a follower of the Advaita Vedanta or non-dual school like a modern Kastrup or old ones like Vivekananda or of course the original Adi Shankara, where there's no distinction between the soul and God, we're all one, we're all God, aham brahmasmi as the Sanskrit saying goes, it doesn't matter. You believe that we are not this body. Everyone who follows this Vedic paradigm, regardless of sub-school, agrees on this premise that, as I said before, we are 100% spiritual and 0% body. And basically, this is what, Elizabeth Solomon is quote-unquote preaching during the entire book. To finish, what's relevant here and why is it important for the future? Well, as I said, what's relevant is that there's a shift in consciousness from either a sort of a very rudimentary biblical understanding of the soul, and also from a very materialistic, physicalist conception of consciousness as being a product of matter, to a consciousness is everything. We are actual consciousness. We are spirit. Life comes from life, as Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, would say. If you've never heard of Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, the one who brought the most wonderful translation and especially commentary to the Bhagavad Gita, I highly recommend you go see this documentary right here that we're translating into French and dubbing into French right now. And so what's the future? What's the next question to ask? Well, what I think is the next question to ask, and it's at the same time a very age-old question, but hopefully scientists are starting to, and philosophers are starting to deal with it. If we're taking it for granted, finally, that fundamentally we are conscious, we are spirit, and we're not matter, that life really is consciousness and not matter, then the next question is, okay, are we individuals after the physical body dies? Or do we merge into some sort of unitary mind and we're all one? Or, as Lord Chaitanya taught, and if you don't know who Lord Chaitanya is, I highly recommend you look him up, maybe it's a combination of both. That's the question. As far as Lord Chaitanya, I recommend you go see this video right here. Thank you very much for watching. Please do support this channel. And until next time, Hare Krishna.